Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your beautiful day to come here and spend a little time remembering and honoring the day that is today. I'm Laura Hermanns, and I'm going to share a little bit about a project that I was a part of back in 2001 that was also meant to honor and remember those who had lost their lives on September 11th. So to kick us off, since we've got a small enough group, I'm going to have everyone just do a quick introduction of themselves too. I love to know who's in the room. So if you could just say your name and what brought you here today. And maybe I'll start in the back with Keiko and Rebecca.
Okay. Actually, 20 years ago, when the Laura initiated this program, actually, it's modern program. I helped doing outreach and going to different schools and community centers, and then we worked together. So I'm just so honored again to work with you, and it's just perfect time today, of course. And thank you very much for coming and doing this. Really appreciate it.
I'm Rebecca, and I'm here because I'm the local history librarian. And so about 4 years ago, somebody donated a large collection of 9/11 newspapers and magazines that they had been holding on to, and it was just getting too painful, and they couldn't hold them onto them anymore. And so they donated them here, and we've been holding on to them for 4 years to do a memoriam on the 20th anniversary. So that's why I'm here.
Cheryl. Just been doing a lot of remembering these last few days about the attacks and everything from those days. And my three boys are they weren't born yet back then, but I've always enjoyed origami, and we've done some origami, and so I wanted to hear your story and bring a crane. So say your name.
I'm Darren Giovanna, and I was learning about 9/11 in school yesterday, and I saw a little this morning.
Thank you.
Colin from I'm Mark. I just take an interest in 9/11 and some of its little known facets.
I'm Monica. I thought this was a project, so I wanted to hear more about it. I'm Chris, I'm Monica's mom, and as I mentioned to you, I watched the coverage this morning, and so it was even my wanting to come to see your part of it, and it was very touching to watch all the things that were going on in the three places, so.
Well, thanks again for being here. And so again, my name is Laura. So I grew up in Racine, Wisconsin. My mom still lives here, my brother. My dad was the pastor of Holy Canadian Lutheran Church for about 20 years before he passed away. So I have deep connections to Racine, and now I live in Milwaukee. I went on to study sustainable peace building as my master's degree, and I now work at UW Milwaukee in what's called the Institute for Systems Change and Peace Building. So this little seed, I think, really sprouted into things that I now get to work on as part of my career. I'll kind of go through like a brief presentation, a little overview of the project. We'll open up for any questions, and then we'll also have a chance to get to fold a crane if you're interested. And then also invite folks to check out some of the newspapers and things here, and then the beautiful exhibit that's set up around the corner in the library. So before I get started, I do just want to take a minute to acknowledge the complexity of the situation that does surround 9/11. I am not an international relations expert, so I'm not here to talk about that. But I do think as a peace builder, it's important that we acknowledge what's going on in the reality of the world. In my experience, we can't move towards true peace and healing unless we're being very clear and upfront about the reality of what's going on. So I do just want us to take a second to acknowledge that There were almost 3,000 lives that were killed on 9/11. And after 20 years of U.S. military intervention in Iraq and Afghanistan, there have been additional American lives lost, as well as Iraqi and Afghani lives lost. And if you're looking for opportunities to support local Afghan refugees, the Milwaukee Muslim Women's Coalition and Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services are great places to support. And the picture here is taken from a graphic of someone who is trying to tell the story of what's going on in Afghanistan. And even from that small clip, you can see it's very complex. And so I just want to bring that into the conversation as well. So even though the world can feel complex and peace can feel like very out of reach, I do really come back a lot to this quote by author and activist Adrienne Marie Brown. One of her principles of change is small is good, small is all, the large is a reflection of the small. So while we're sitting here talking about folding origami cranes, that can feel like, to me sometimes it feels like such a small thing in the scope of everything that's happening in the world. But I love this quote because it reminds me that the things that we do at the small level, in our personal lives, in our interpersonal lives, in our community, that those things ripple out. So the choices that we get to make in our own lives, those things matter. They do matter at the large scale. And so doing small things like folding an origami crane may not change the face of international politics, but it's a model of saying what we want in the world. So that's kind of what brings me to the Peace Parade project. So to kind of bring us back to that day, back in 2001, just had a question for you all. What do you remember from that day? What were some of your thoughts or feelings from that day?
I was at work, and my husband called me, and he said, a plane just hit one of the towers in New York. And I said, what kind of plane? He said, they haven't released it yet. But it was, and in fact, I passed it on to my coworkers because they were not aware of it until my husband called and told me.
And what kind of feelings did you have?
Well, everyone was shocked. They were saying, well, what happened? How did this happen? It was a question of what happened and how could this possibly happen? And it wasn't until later on there was more coverage than on the radio. Everybody turned on the radio to find out what is going on right now in New York. And my nephew lived in New York at the time. Actually, I had 3 nephews that lived there. And he was a freelance photographer. And he went down there to take pictures. And when he was down there, he was photographing the events that were going on. And he said, when the second plane hit, he was there and he saw it. So he said, he was standing there taking pictures. A policeman came up to him and he got on a car roof and was taking pictures so that he could get a better view. And a policeman said, get down and start running. And that's when the implosion happened. And he said he could feel it behind him. And he said it was literally, he said it was a war zone. He said ash and debris was flying all over. So he actually was there and saw what happened.
Yeah, that's some fear, uncertainty, shock, overwhelm. Absolutely. Anyone else? What were some of your thoughts or feelings on that day?
I was getting ready to teach a computer class, and I was sure if thought about how to use the internet and get prepared, and gave the people the option that we didn't have to do it. We could, but we still did our little plans. I remember my dad had sent me an email first about the plane, and then after the second plane hit, we're under attack. And I was trying to get ready for this class, and I remember walking at lunch. I would go walk in Kenosha along the lake, and I remember how beautiful a day it was, like today, and there being no planes, and just being overwhelmed with uncertainty. And I also remember feeling bad that when I saw people walking, I had second guessing about their motives and who they were and that kind of thing. And I didn't like feeling that at all.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I think some of my reactions were similar. And so I was a 12-year-old, and I remember being at middle school, I was a student at McKinley Middle School, and in our social studies class, we were watching the footage, and it was that feeling of uncertainty and fear, and parents were coming to take their kids out of school. I remember being with my parents, and I think my mom just arrived in the back here too, so I remember sitting with my parents and watching the news coverage that evening and just feeling so helpless, feeling like what do you do? Like, what do you even do in this situation? And how do you do something that has a different narrative than the hate and the fear and the chaos that I was watching on the screen? So along kind of with some brainstorming with my parents, we kind of came up with this idea of like, what is it that we can do? What is some small gesture or some piece, something we can do here in our community that would honor those who had lost their lives, but also try to show that there's other things in the world too. There is peace in the world, and how can we use this as a tool to bring people back together? I think in times of fear and uncertainty, it can be easy to go to our separate areas. But what can we do to bring people back into a relationship with each other? So that's where we kind of came up with the origami crane as a symbol that we could use to do some of these things. So the symbolism of the crane comes from Japanese legend that if a person folded 1,000 cranes, they would have their wish granted. And this is talked about more in the book Sadako and the 1,000 Paper Cranes, which is based on a true story of a young girl who developed leukemia after the atomic bomb was dropped in Japan, and her efforts to fold 1,000 cranes so that her wishes would be granted. So we chose that too. It's also very accessible, as some of our friends here already brought some cranes in for us too. All it takes is a piece of paper, so it doesn't take too much to be able to get involved with it. So we thought this could be a great symbol of the story that we wanted to share with Racine and the world. And so as we started, the additional with the piece of paper is that you can write on it. So as we started folding, you could write prayers, you could write a blessing, you could write your hopes for peace, and then fold it inside the crane. So each crane can hold a piece of the wish that you have for the world. So once we kind of developed this idea, we were like, okay, like how do we do this? So we wanted to fold one crane for every person that lost their life that day. At that time, the count was over 5,000. They later, when they got more accurate numbers, it did come down, but that was the number we were using. So I have to give a lot of credit to my dad, his position too as the leader of a big congregation, and he was really able to help put this into action. And so we developed peace crane folding workshops at Holy Communion, here at the public library, various schools, YMCA, all over Racine. We would also have folks who couldn't come to a workshop, but they knew how to fold already. So we would just have bags of peace cranes showing up at our house. And so it really only took us, so with all of these groups together, the people of Racine folded 5,470 cranes in just over a month. So it only took us from the end of September to the beginning of November. So people really, really showed up and felt like this was a way to show their honoring of lives and their investment in their community. And so these are some of the pictures here. That's my dad on top. And then you can kind of see here in the picture too, but because the cranes came from all over the city, there were big cranes and small cranes. There were cranes made out of newspaper and sheet music and bubblegum wrappers and whatever people had kind of laying around, they took and they folded into these beautiful cranes. So once we had all these cranes, we were kind of like, okay, well, what do we do with these now? How do we share these with people? So folks from our congregation at Holy Communion took on the role of stringing them together into these beautiful garlands. And then another person from the congregation came up with this idea to create these 2 star-shaped frames, both in recognition of the Twin Towers. The star is a reference to our flag, and it was just a beautiful shape to be able to show all the different angles to the cranes. So once we got them kind of strung and created this display system, then they started traveling. So they started here in Racine, they were here at the library, schools, churches, conferences would host them. We've got a logbook over here that you're welcome to take a look at. And this picture actually is from a church in New York. So my grandparents, my dad's side of the family lives in New York, and so we worked with my family there to get all of these birds shipped out to New York, and they did some travels around there too. We also had this logbook that accompanied them and invited folks just to write down what were their impressions, what were they feeling, how did this impact them, what thoughts did they feel like they still wanted to share about what had happened that day. So I'll share just a few of those quotes with you here. So this one was a poem that was written by a girl at Jersted Middle School. She said, "Peace cranes, beautiful, peaceful, hanging from the stars, every color, every size, wonderful by far. Origami to you, but not to me, thousands of lives I see." Another person from a church in New York said, "The display gave us a new appreciation for life. The many birds reminded us of the many lives that were lost, but also of the many caring people who made them. It is beautiful. Thank you." And Sister Davida from here at the Siena Center said, "I see the virtues of peace, love, and hope demonstrated by the kindness of so many volunteers who expressed for us our prayers for the victims of such a tragedy. It is an inspiring affirmation of victory over evil. Thank you for sharing with us at the Siena Center." And from another pastor in New York, "It is a prayer for peace and healing. There are lots of ways to respond to tragedy. This one brings people together and brings beauty into the world." And then one from me that I was quoted in a newspaper that said, "Even kids can do something wonderful." So as we prepare to go and do some folding of our own, or if you can't do some folding, just some thoughts to take with you is coming back to this quote about small is good, small is all, and the large is a reflection of the small. So my invitation for you today is to think about the story of the peace crane as being this little small example of what folks wanted to see in the world. And I invite you all to fold a crane or to take with you and think about what is your intention of something small in your life, in your community, in your family. What's the small thing of peace and hope that you want to contribute into the world? And how do you want to bring that in? And what is your prayer or blessing of peace for the world? So my last quote I'll leave us with is from Sadako Sasaki from Sadako and the Thousand Paper Cranes. She says, "I will write peace on your wings, and you will fly all over the world." And these are pictures of me doing peace crane folding in Kenya as part of my field work, my master's degree. So thank you again, and I would love to open it up if there's any questions or comments, and if not, we can try some paper folding.
Thank you very much for sharing.
Yeah, thank you.